Welcome to GreenChat episode 2, Major Contributors to Unsustainability, part A. So today we have our co-presenter Hiran Vedam and myself, Max Narasimhan. So in the last episode, we spent a lot of time on the various terms, net zero, climate change, etc. Right? So in this episode, we want to focus on some of the major contributors to this unsustainability phase that we're living in on Earth. To begin that, let's talk a little bit about the various spheres that exist. What we call as the biosphere, which is where we live, geosphere, and you've got hydrosphere and atmosphere, right? These are they don't live in isolation. They are very interconnected. And I think the fifth one is the ether in Panchabhuta, as in Hindu mythology. And if you look at them, they're all connected with each other. And like in the last episode, damage done to one sphere can affect the other spheres. And that's what we want to talk about today, a little bit more in depth. Now, let's look at what all we've done. To begin with, today we're going to focus a little bit on climate change, the atmospheric, aerosol loading or some kind of pollution that we've caused, the chemical pollution, and then we'll delve a little deeper into land use modifications, the nitrogen and phosphorus cycle, etc. In the next episode, which is episode 3, we will talk about ocean acidification and biodiversity loss. These two are the biggest contribution in a negative way to unsustainability by humans. So welcome now to Hiran Vedam, who's going to join us and speak to us a little bit about what this greenhouse gas and the pollution, etc. is.
So we spoke about greenhouse gases in our last episode, and we also talked about how the ozone depletion is contributing to increasing temperatures on Earth. Ozone depletion is a problem when ozone gets depleted in the stratosphere. But because of the human activity, there is ozone accumulation that's happening in the lower troposphere because of volatile organic chemicals, CFCs, NOx, and other gases we are putting in. And all of these are contributing to raise in the Earth's temperatures.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting how, this greenhouse effect is causing, and the human-enhanced greenhouse effect, how it's affecting the environment. Now, can we talk a little bit about what are the major causes of this greenhouse effect?
Sure. So if you look at where the major greenhouse gas emissions are coming from, the largest contributor is energy, and agriculture and land use changes are another big contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And the greenhouse gases include carbon dioxide primarily, methane, nitrogen oxides, and so on. So each of these has a specific role to contribute in raising this Earth's temperature. And we can talk a little bit more about each of these as we go along.
Wow, 73% of greenhouse gases are caused by energy. Why is the greenhouse emissions from energy so high here?
If we look at what we have been using for meeting our energy needs, for a long time we sustained ourselves by using traditional biomass like wood, grass, and animal waste and so on. But once the Industrial Revolution started in the early 1800s or late 1700s, the energy needs of our human society have shot up rapidly. We were using peat, which is a fossil fuel, for a while, and then we started to use coal, then natural gas, and oil. All these contribute to the carbon dioxide emissions because each of these is a carbon-based compound, and when you burn it, you get carbon dioxide.
No, that's very interesting. So let's dive into each one of them one by one. Let's talk about coal first.
Yeah, so coal today is primarily used for energy generation. So most countries, including India, use coal for running their thermal plants that generate the electricity. It's also used for heating, for the boilers in the industrial plants. They use coal as a feedstock. Coal is also a very good reducing agent, which means that if you combine it with some oxide, for example, iron oxide, and heat them to very high temperatures, you get a reduced form of iron oxide, which is iron, which we can use for a variety of purposes. So in steel production, that's what it is used for. In cement production, it is used for thermal energy use. In most of the other industries, it's mainly used for heating our water for boilers and all the heat exchangers that we use in the industrial plant.
So you've got 68% from electricity generation, 7% from steel, 4% from cement, heating, 3%. I love it. When you say others are 18%, it's like a death by a million cuts, right? You've got many uses of coal, include alumina refinery, paper industries, chemical industry, and you've got a million ways in which you can pollute using coal. So coal is something that we just can't live with or without it, looks like.
Well, I mean, every industrial plant needs hot water, steam. Yeah. And coal is the primary way we produce this steam in these plants.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk now a little bit about gas, Hiran, which is another big contributor.
Right. So gas actually is much easier to transport, and it is cleaner than coal because now when you burn gas, what you get is only carbon dioxide. But with coal, you have fly ash included with it, which is a major environmental problem. And which is why gas has replaced coal in a number of industrial applications for giving the thermal energy, for meeting the thermal energy needs of the industry. Not only that, it's also used for residential areas for both heating and cooking. Our piped gas is compressed natural gas, which is natural gas, right? And for heating, it is very easy to transport, which is why it is used for building heating, district heating, and those kind of things.
In my opinion, natural gas is such a wonderful name for just methane, which is what it is. It's just a marketing term.
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed. So natural gas, to a large extent, and coal to a smaller extent, are the primary ingredients for making syngas, which is nothing but a mixture of hydrogen and carbon monoxide. And this is the precursor for a number of industrial chemicals, including methanol, ammonia, which is used for making fertilizers, as a feedstock for the Fischer-Tropsch process for producing diesel and naphtha, and carbon monoxide directly can be used for producing acetic acid. These are all very important chemicals that we need for, our modern day living.
So, I mean, I'm not a chemistry buff, but I'm going to tell you that what I got out of this is basically you got the primary chemicals, and then from there on you get the secondary chemicals, which leads to end products. Am I summarizing that?
Yeah. That is correct. That is correct.
Okay. So now let's, I think we've talked about gas, we've talked about coal. Now let's jump to oil.
Right. Oil is primarily needed to meet our transportation needs. So when we take crude and we crack it and distill it, we get a number of products that every one of these is used in one form or another to meet our transportation needs, to a smaller extent to meet our cooking and heating needs. Okay, petrol, kerosene, diesel. I mean, all of these sound very familiar, right? We go to the gas pump and we fill petrol. Or in India, most of the cooking is done using LPG cylinders. Not only that, your road, the bitumen that's used for laying down your road, the lubricating oil that's used in your vehicle, all of these come from your oil, right?
So, I mean, it's brilliant how the crude oil transforms itself into all of these various pollutants. The efficiency of the full use of crude oil is being demonstrated here, but not the efficiency of the energy produced or the energy used to produce that energy. I think that's really telltale story in the crude oil and the oil business.
Right. So everything that comes out of the crude oil is used in one form or another. Not only that, if you look at all these three, coal, oil, and gas, and you look at the kind of chemicals we produce a lot of fertilizers using these. Okay, I'm sure we'll be talking more about fertilizers later on in this episode. Thermoplastics, additives, fibers, rubber, all of these, we are producing them from crude oil, from coal, from gas. Not only that, each of these is useful in every sphere of our modern day living, from the vehicles we use, to the toys our children play with, to the equipment that our medical doctors use, everywhere. So it's not easy to escape the use of fossil fuels and the chemicals we produce from these.
Yeah, I mean, no wonder the biggest company in the world is an oil company, right? And they continue to be because they're in every aspect of our life. And it's not easy to decouple oil, coal, and natural gas out of our daily life. It's going to be extremely difficult. That's clear. And then, let's talk a little bit about, all of these things have, the simple compound CO2 that's being emitted, plus carbon monoxide, nitrogen, etc. But then you've got the polymeric form, which is being used in most of these things, right? Let's talk about plastics a little bit.
Right. So, I mean, the global demand for plastics has been growing rapidly after the Second World War. In fact, many of these came into existence because during the war, we realized that our needs couldn't be met using the naturally available material. From electrical wiring to building and construction, we continue to use a lot of plastics, a lot of these industrial chemicals. And this is why it is not a very simple problem. And you might ask, why not replace the fossil fuel with something that's more environmentally friendly? So to answer that, let me show you a slide from a study that was done by the European chemical industry. So they looked at how can we become carbon neutral by 2050. So the two possible routes were to use either biomass or to use carbon dioxide that we are producing plenty of and we want to remove out of the atmosphere. So can we use these two to make our chemical industry neutral? The challenge is the amount of low carbon power that's needed for this transformation is almost equal to, it's much more than the total clean energy that we'll be producing in entire Europe by 2050. Okay, and the investment needs are huge. So, which is why the decarbonizing the chemical sector is not easy, and that's why it's a major contributor to the global warming or climate change and so on.
No, I think you made a very valid point here. We're stuck with these things because of our daily practices, the way we use our products, and what type of products we buy. Right, all of these things have been sort of ingrained in us over the years, over the last 40, 50 years. It's not over hundreds of years. It's over the last 40, 50 years. And, we continue to have these unsustainable practices that will, continue to damage the environment. It's not just about air, right? So are we only talking about air as a pollution from these, coal and gas and oil? Or are we looking at other types of pollution as well?
Not at all. In fact, like if you look at the entire cycle of coal, oil and gas from well to the customer, we are damaging the earth because we are either cutting down trees for mining or for drilling purposes. And as we drill deep into the earth, we are really causing microcracks that can lead to earthquakes. There are leakages of methane into the air, oil leakages into water streams. As you transport it, there can be, major spills like that happened with the Exxon Valdez accident or the BP oil spill that happened not too long ago, which was an environmental disaster, right? No, so in addition to polluting at the end use level, we have potential to pollute the other subsystems of the earth along the way, from earth to water to air.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just flabbergasted at just looking at the energy needed as well, right? Right from drilling, pumping the oil out, doing the refining, transporting it, then fitting it inside the IC engine, which is 38% efficiency, and then in the end you're also polluting. By the way, the oil was started to fix the pollution of horse manure, right? And here we are sitting, years, decades after that, and we are seeing all these fossil fuel impacts. Let's talk a little bit more about all kinds of impacts, Hiran, of the fossil fuel.
Right. So to kind of wrap this up, fossil fuels impact everything from the oceans by acidifying them, leading to extreme weather conditions, sea level rise, plastic pollution, which is the most visible form which we are all familiar with, air and water pollution. Of course, burning these fossil fuels also leads to emission of particulate matters, PM2.5, PM10. All of these are health hazards. So fossil fuels have a number of negative impacts on the environment. So, let's kind of switch gears and talk about the second most major contributor, which is the land use change and deforestation.
Yeah.
So, Mark, what are what's happening on the land use and why is it such a big contributor?
So if you look at land use, right, the global land use for food production, and let's take a look at the Earth's surface to begin with. You've got 71% is ocean. Thankfully, that's a big portion, right? But you have 29% is land. Out of that 29%, 71% of it is habitable land. I'm removing the glaciers, the barren land, which we're not touching. The 71% habitable land. Out of that 71%, we're fixated with agriculture as we moved away from hunter-gatherers to become agriculturalists and farmers. 50% is used for agriculture. Still, you have 37% forests, and the other few, shrubs, 11%. The other one, urban. If you look at the urban buildup of land, is only 1%. Imagine the contribution with just 1%. 1% can make a big impact. Then you look at, out of that 50% agriculture, you got 77% is purely for livestock, meat, and dairy production, right? And you got 23% are for crops. The surprising aspect that I found out is out of that 77%, the actual calorific supply from that 77% is only 18%. And the rest of the 82% is coming from 23% land used for crop production. So, maybe Hiran, you can talk a little about why such a little calorific supplies for humans is coming from 77% livestock land.
Right. When animals are grazing on the land, they are consuming food to sustain themselves, to meet their day-to-day energy needs, and the rest of it gets stored in their body as meat and fat, right? So majority of it is used for their sustenance, which is why the calorific value we as humans get out of these animals is so small compared to the land we use for them. So where is all this land that we are using for agriculture coming from?
Yeah, so if you look at it, right, you look at these types of forests. You've got the boreal forest, the temperate forests, temperate grasslands, the tropical forests, classic deserts and semi-deserts. You've got the tundra, you've got wetlands, tropical savannas and croplands. All these are actually carbon storage devices, devised by Mother Nature, right? And if you lose any of these guys, you're going to lose the ability to store carbon, right? Here you can look at tons of carbon per hectare. Wetlands top the whole thing by storing about 643 tons per hectare of carbon, right? There is now this renewed focus on restorations of wetland. Now it makes sense, right? They are the biggest carbon storage in the entire set of land use for carbon, right? So there needs to be some renewed focus in terms of these types of forests. How do we mitigate? Look at options to better use the land so that your carbon sinks don't disappear from Earth. So, like we talked about, the biggest land use in this is for grazing, right? Let's face it, forgetting the forests and other areas, humanity has destroyed 1/3 of the world's forest, right? 57% we started of the land was forest area, 6 billion hectares, 10,000 years ago. We were hunters and gatherers. Up to 5,000 years ago, we were still hunters and gatherers. See the change? It's only 55%. Very little. We just invented farming 5,000 years ago, and it was a very small area, the crop area being utilized. In 1700, crop became 3% and grazing became 6%. Milk and animal husbandry came on board. In 1900s, crops have become 8% and grazing is 16%. As we grow to 1950, 12% and 31%, 31% of the land is for grazing. And if you look at, compare agriculture versus grazing, it's a big difference. So we've got the next piece of this information is what we call as the nitrogen cycle. The atmospheric nitrogen gets absorbed by plants and we get ammonia. Ammonia gets converted to nitrite through these, what we call as the good bacteria. And then nitrite to nitrate. And then the nitrite goes back into the ocean through leaching and also back into the atmosphere as nitrogen by reducing nitrite. So this is basically the nitrogen cycle. And humans have actually disrupted it by two things, right? One is the industrial fixation and the biological fixation by adding too much nitrogen and phosphorus in the fertilizer. We'll talk about phosphorus cycle in the next time. But here, because of the increased nitrogen, what you're able to do is produce more nitrous oxide and NOx, which goes back into the atmosphere. Plus, the land degrades with the increased nitrogen. What is meant for the crops is not getting absorbed by the crops. The nitrogen NPK is supposed to be absorbed by the crops, but that's not what's happening. And it's going into the land, making the land degraded, and you cause all kinds of landslides and potential issues of water flow back into rivers, which then leaches the nitrogen back into the oceans. So this is a vicious cycle, and this is the biggest contributor. Same story with phosphorus. You've got absorption by plants. We have disrupted it by adding NPK, right? So phosphorus is the other contributor. Then it basically you have incorporation by the animals from the phosphorus, and you've got decomposition. The decomposers are of course the bacteria, the good bacteria, and you form these underground phosphate reserves, which leaches into the water. These leached phosphates form underground phosphate reserves, and which keeps increasing formation of these phosphate sediments due to the formation of the phosphate sediments, and you've got geological uplift and formation of new kind of rocks, which is again a vicious cycle. All these landslides that we're seeing, etc. Phosphorus cycle disruption is another big contributor towards climate change.
So we've talked about how land use change has increased the carbon dioxide concentration. We've talked about the effects of use of fertilizers and the changes in the nitrogen and phosphorus cycle. So it all seems like effects on land pretty much, or are there other effects we see because of our human activity on land?
Yeah, so as we said, right, it starts with land, deforestation. You've got agriculture, mining, urbanization, land settlement causes the degradation of land. This erosion of land causes the sedimentation into the rivers, degrading the water quality. You're polluting it with excess nitrogen, excess phosphorus, etc. It leads to species extinction in the water, and this increased nitrogen and phosphorus again going to the ocean as well. And because of the increased river levels, you're increasing the flooding every time there's rain, right? So this is a vicious cycle. So it's not just about land. How one sphere affects the other sphere. You're seeing that.
So all this sounds pretty depressing in terms of climate change, in terms of what we are doing to all the different subsystems. So is there light at the end of the tunnel? Is there
Absolutely.
something we can all do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first step is, of course, acknowledging the problem, which is where we are, right? If we don't acknowledge the problem exists, then we can't solve it. If you don't know where you are, a map cannot help. But that doesn't mean that technology and other solutions aren't available for solving this problem, right? The first step is, of course, afforestation or reforestation, but with the right metrics. Focus on plants, reforesting areas, but also use local type plants. And you measure the right metrology is not the number of trees planted, but how many of them actually survive, right? The various weather cycles. Then you've got soil carbon sequestrations. Several technologies exist. We'll get to all of them in the future episodes. It's not all dull and gloom, Hiran. There's a lot that's happening. First, we need to understand how big the problem is, and then we will get to each one of these solutions. That'll keep the interest level. So we've come to the end of today's episode, which is on the major contributors. If we can summarize that, we talked about the four spheres, the biospheres, atmosphere, geosphere, and hydrosphere, how interconnected and intertwined they are by nature, and how disruption in one causes disruption in the other. We talked about the various types of, disruptions, including climate change. We've got air pollution, chemical pollution, etc. And we talked about the land use as being a primary contributor as well. So to continue this in the next episode, we will talk about both biodiversity loss and ocean, acidification and the use of fresh water. We are losing fresh water in a big way. So those three items we will cover in the next episode. Thank you again for your time. Signing off from IIT MA, SIAG, Societal Impact Action Group. This is Hiran and myself, Max Narasimhan.
Thank you for listening. And before we leave, we do want to remind you to keep those feedback comments coming so that we know how we are doing and what we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you.